This is our regular webinar on of environmental health language collaborative, and there are ways to become involved with help, which yes, people heard many times already. You can email me or Charles Schmidt, who is the director of the NIHS Office of Data Science, to suggest ideas for use cases, new activities and seminars, and useful resources to add to our portal. It's very easy to find our website. You just Google basically help and NIHS, and it's the first page that comes up. Ask Chris Duncan to present our speaker.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks everyone online for joining today. As Maria mentioned, my name's Chris Duncan. I'm a program administrator in the NIEHS Division of Extramural Research and Training. And today we're excited to continue our series of ELP webinars focused on highlighting ongoing data and metadata standards efforts in the environmental health sciences. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Kei-Hoi Cheung. Dr. Cheung is a professor in the Department of Biomedical Informatics and Data Science at the Yale School of Medicine. And he also has a secondary appointment with the Department of Biostatistics and the Division of Health Informatics at the Yale School of Public Health. Kei's multidisciplinary research interests include the use of ontology and knowledge graph approaches, and leveraging the next generation of graph database technologies to enable semantic annotation and integration of biomedical data. In addition, he's been working on natural language processing projects, including the application of large language models to retrieve, annotate, and extract information from scientific literature, as well as from clinical notes. Kei is the PI of a NIEHS grant for accelerating data and metadata standards in the environmental health science study of emerging water contaminants. In this project, his team is engaging with researchers from various communities, including the Yale Superfund Research Program and the US EPA, to explore use of metadata standards and large language models to capture metadata from multiple sources, including databases, repositories, and literature. So with that in mind, let's move along to the presentation. Welcome, Kei, and please feel free to share your slides and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Maria and Chris, for the kind invitation and introduction. It's really my pleasure to be able to share with you my work in this, area, and so this is our, a part of our outreach effort to different communities, including the HLC. So let me share my screen. Just bear with me one sec. Great, thank you. Yeah, so this is, the title of my talk, Large Language Model as a Bridge Over Unstructured Contaminated Water Data. So so this is, part of the funded project that Chris mentioned by NIEHS. So one of the goals of this project is to use a large language model to extract exposure-related metadata from scientific literature. And so I think, let me, I have, yeah. So in this diagram, why I use this bridge metaphor is, because you can see in this picture here, so this is not just a bridge over contaminated water or the associated free text data in the literature. The main goal is to try to extract this contaminant of emerging concern or CEC exposure metadata from free text literature. But the bridge, LLM is a bridge because it also connects both data and metadata standards on the left and the free text unstructured data on the right. So LLM using metadata standards to be able to annotate the text retrieve the relevant documents and do extraction from the retrieved document for the kind of exposure data we are interested in collecting, put that into a structure. So just a brief introduction. As I mentioned before, our main goal is to extract contaminants of emerging concerned exposure metadata from the literature. So what is CEC? So they are natural or man-made chemicals, not commonly monitored in the environment. So these include things like pharmaceuticals or personal care products that can be either intentionally or accidentally released to the environment. So CECs in environmental media such as water may pose significant public health risk. Therefore, systematic reviews of literature can help identify and characterize this environmental risk. The rapidly expanding volumes of publications makes manual review quite challenging, as you know. So to address this issue, a scalable automated pipeline using LLMs was developed to extract metadata from publications related to contaminants of emerging concerns. So why has the use of LLM in environmental evidence synthesis been limited, even though people are aware of the power of LLM? So there are several reasons. One of them, as you may know, so LLM generate this non-deterministic output. So that make reproducibility a little bit challenging. Another issue with LLM is, of course, this hallucination, because it's pre-trained with a large amount of knowledge, or maybe from the literature, from the web resources. But given its probabilistic nature, sometimes it would hallucinate to give you erroneous results. And therefore, we need to use metadata or data standards to sort of help guide LLM to extract the most relevant and correct information from literature in this case. And also, we need a scalable approach to use LLM on large amount of text data. And also, we need to carefully evaluate the LLM output. In that process, we need to work closely with environmental domain experts for their oversight to help interpret complex environmental studies. And this environmental scientists usually are not know too much technical detail of how the LLM approach work. So by working with them, collaborating with them in this process, we sort of go through this sort of like a training or educational process to make sure they understand how the whole process works and how their input and guidance would help, each step of the process to be able to, address their research needs. So another barrier of using LLM in environmental research is sort of like a dilemma. On one hand, people see the potential benefit of using LLM in this domain. But on the other hand, as you may be aware, LLM also, create this maybe some people perceive as negative environmental impacts because of its high energy consumption, water use, and carbon footprint. So this is sort of like a dilemma, particularly in this domain. Is it the benefit outweigh the risk? So how do we address it? So first of all, in terms of data or metadata standards, so we start with this so-called PECO framework. PECO is an acronym for Population, Exposure, Comparator, and Outcome. So basically, this framework helps researchers to develop focused exposure-related questions and guide literature search. So for population, it kind of help people to identify, think about what type of study population of their interest. For example, is it adult population versus for example, people interested in occupational research, they may be looking at workers of certain occupation, or could be for pregnancy outcome. Then the pregnant woman population would be relevant. What type of exposure, agent of exposure of research interest. In this case, in our case, is water pollution, but other cases could be air pollution or other type of chemical exposure. So some studies may have control population versus some experimental group. So we can also potentially extract that type of information from the literature. Of course, last but not least, health outcome is an important thing, especially for more recent environmental studies. People are more interested in exploring, studying the potential links between certain type of exposure and the health outcomes like cancer or respiratory disease. Now, another standard we want to leverage is the reporting guidelines or checklists. So our reporting guideline is a simple structure tool for researchers to use while writing manuscripts, reporting research findings. It also provides a minimal list of items of entities needed to ensure the results can be understood by a reader. And also replicated by, the results can be replicated by another researcher and can even be used by policymaker to make informed decision. And last but not least, can also be included in systematic review and possibly meta-analysis. Now, for this LLM project, we sort of combine PECO framework and the checklist idea to create this PECO-aligned checklist. So basically, it's a list of 8 entity types. They include a study population, a study year, contaminant, medium, source, location, biospecimen, and health outcome. So those are the 8 entity types that we use to guide our LLM to extract exposure-related metadata from title and abstracts in this case. So this is where we start, at the title and abstract level before we go into the full text, full-length papers. So another thing about designing prompt engineering in LLM, because prompt engineering is a critical part of making sure the LLM would get the most accurate, relevant answer from the literature. So there are some best practices that we recently, found and recently published. So in this 2026 recent article, they, propose some environmentally friendly prompt engineering approach. So in this paper, it described 6 best practices, including variational prompting. So basically, you try to avoid doing too much inference or iterative steps to try to get your answers. You try to create prompts that could get answer in different scenarios in one shot or few shot. Try to avoid using jargon or local lingua. So try to avoid using things like PECO. You better spell it out, what PECO means, because that could be ambiguous. So that try to avoid ambiguities. And also use modeling. What it means is, because LLM is trained on generalized large amount of knowledge, So when you try to do this type of domain related extraction, so you want to tell the model, what area of interest you are targeting. So in this case, it's environmental health science, perhaps. And then you want to also specify the length and the format as part of the problem. So all these, best practices, if you adopt them, could help you reduce, the environmental impact caused by the LLM engine. In this paper, they did a study. For example, if you follow this, use this 6 best practices to do the prompt engineering. So they, try on different scenarios and evaluate them. They found, you can reduce up to, 48% in terms of energy consumption and carbon footprint. So this is quite amazing. So now, to motivate domain experts, in this case, environmental scientists, to work with us, to collaborate with us, to use LLM to extract the kind of relevant information they want for their research projects. So we work on this particular use case. So for the Yale Superfund program, so we exploring this, emerging water contaminants. So PFAS is one of the emerging, especially the emerging PFAS chemicals that have been recently found in the drinking water. So we want to, extract related metadata from the literature. So we have this use case, which is PFAS exposure in drinking water. So as you know, PFAS chemicals are a widely studied class of persistent synthetic compounds that have, obtained global attention due to their widespread human exposure and potential toxicity. PFAS have been extensively used in industrial and customer applications such as food packaging, textile firefighting foams, etc. PFAS are called forever chemicals as they are characterized by strong carbon fluorine bonds that confer environmental persistence and bioaccumulation. Human exposure to PFAS is nearly ubiquitous, and the health effects associated with PFAS exposure is widespread. Last but not the least, among different PFAS sources, contaminated drinking water is a major and widespread source of PFAS exposures. Now, so this is the schematic overview of our LLP pipeline. So we started with this literature corpus from PubMed. So we use all these PubMed title and abstracts from 2010 to 2025. So we do keyword search for PFAS for drinking water. So we boil down to 7,700 articles. And then, we use LLM to check this over 7,000 articles to make sure they are all, we only using those that are related to PFAS exposure in drinking water. So after that, we get it down to 1,425 articles. So we work with a domain expert to develop the green prompts and guide the LLM model to extract exposure related metadata from this 1,400 articles, the abstracts and title. We apply the PECO framework and the PECO Ally checklist that I shown you previously in this extraction process. And then, the output of the LLM model will be going through this normalization and semantic harmonization process. So we basically map the extracted entity terms to UMLS concept ID. Of course, not all of them can be mapped, but we found a portion of them can be mapped to UMLS concept IDs to have this kind of ontology linked type of LLM output. And then finally, we fed this abstracts and also this extracted entities with a link to ontology IDs to visualization tools. So I will show you later what are these visualization tools to help users to analyze, visualize the extracted metadata. So just want to give you a quick example of one type of green prompt. For example, for user modeling, so you basically tell the LLM agent what kind of users or expert that you are, and expect the agent to help you the best. So in this case, we specify the role of the user is an expert environmental scientist specializing in studying PFAS, water contamination occurrences or events. So we even give a few review articles that are recommended by our domain experts to help the agent to be aware of these few papers to use some of the approach recommended by this paper. And then to avoid too much inferencing, so we also specifically tell the agent, in this step we don't need normalization, we don't need inference or even modification. Okay, so another example of green prompt is to specify the output format. We don't want to output in free text format, because we want to output something that the machine can read, and also control the amount of information returned by the LLM agent. So in this case, we use this PECO-align checklist to create this JSON output structure. So the extracted metadata will be put in this JSON format. So so basically extract all the entity terms from the 1,400 titles and abstracts. So we apply GPT 5.2 Chat 14. So this is one of the latest GPT model that is available, and it also is not too expensive to run. So we try to balance cost and efficiency. So this the table showed you the number of entities extracted for each entity types. For example, PFAS chemicals, of course, has the highest number of PFAS terms, PFAS chemicals extracted from the paper. The second one is environmental medium. So that's a total of over 10,000 or close to 11,000 entity terms extracted from this collection of titles and abstracts. So to do a quick evaluation, so basically we use this iterative human-in-the-loop process to work closely with our domain expert and annotator to refine the prompt, evaluate the LLM output. So we use 100 abstract as our sample to evaluate the performance. So basically, for this entity types, our performance is quite good. So it achieved an average of exact match with an average score of 0.92. So the next step is to map this extracted entity terms to UMLS. So as you know, so these terms are basically free text, can be synonyms, or can be more general term versus more specific terms like bottled water versus bottled mineral water, etc. And this standardized harmonization process will help standardize downstream data analysis we start with UMLS because a lot of people have used UMLS. Of course, in the future, we'll also try to map to other non-UMLS ontologies. So this table show you how many entities can be or entity terms can be mapped to UMLS concepts based on this 100 abstract sample. And you can see, some category have higher percent of match. For example, environmental medium out of 199 terms from this sample collection of abstracts. 127 of them have exact match. 32 of them have partial match. What partial match means, for example, you have a more specific term, but they can only be mapped to a more general concept like the one you see. The bottled mineral water can be mapped to bottled water if only bottled water has a UMLS concept. The lowest one is the contamination source have high, percent of no match. So next, I would like to show you, once we extract all this metadata, how you analyze or visualize the extracted metadata. There are two. So in this paper published in 2022, it described how to perform bibliometric analysis of PFAS studies from 2001 to 2018. So it used a different visualization approach to do this type of biometric data, literature data analysis. So basically, you can see, they use a geographic map or clustering, visualization, and bar chart, things like that to explore the trend, the distribution, the topics, and the hotspot. So we use this type of principle to develop our visualization method. So just the basic one to show you the distribution of different types of entities. So here are the different distributions. Medium, for example, you can see surface water. So we asked our domain expert to group all these entity terms into higher level categories like surface water and drinking water. So they are, frequently found in the literature in the medium category. So others like population, we divided into two groups by age and by environmental or occupational type of population studies. And you can see their corresponding distribution. Similarly, for outcome, you can see health risk, cancer are sort of near the top. So now, in terms of visualizing the extracted metadata, so one of the visualization tool our group has developed is called MedWiz, and I would like to show you a live demo instead of a static demo. So just bear with me. So this is the MedWiz visualization. So basically, so in this web-based visualization interface, you can see each circle or each dot corresponding to an article or abstract and title in this case. The size of the dot is represent the number of citations. So the bigger the circle, the higher number of citations. So this is cumulative. So you can see, so by default, you can see this visualization is represented by this list of PFAS. So we are only looking at a subset of the PFAS that of interest to EPA monitoring purposes. Of course, we extract more than this list, but for demonstration purpose, we just show you this targeted list of PFAS chemicals of interest to EPA monitoring and regulation. And so you can see, I can zoom in and zoom out. So this map, and then, I can select a particular topic and to select this group of papers from this topic. And in the bottom here, you can see a bar chart. So basically, it shows you the growth of publications over time. And I can move the slider. Okay, so I can look at a particular range of publication years, and you can see this, PFAS. The published PFAS exposure studies sort of increase, the number of publication increase over time. And of course, you can also see we have another menu item to show you by a year or range of year. And you can see, the red or orange color are more recent published PFAS exposure studies. You can see say between 2018 and 2025, it more than triple or even quadruple the number of publications or studies published, compared to earlier time. So then we go back to the PFAS, and you can also look at it by journals, by journal type. Let me go back to the PFAS list, and then I can select a particular group, a particular topic, in this case, drinking water. Let me see, okay. And I can create a selection. So in this selection, oh, sorry. So this is the one I want to select. So in this case, there are over 250 citations, and I can, export this collection as in JSON format for downstream analysis, or I can use this chat box feature to pose a natural language query. So that I have prepared a query. To save time, I just copy and paste. So this will take maybe 30 seconds to return the results. So basically, in this case, something is not right. Okay, so sorry. So let me select this again. Okay. Yeah, sorry, something is not working here, so I might need to go back to the slide. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so basically I selected this cancer. When I zoom in this drinking water contamination, I can see all the nearby clusters. So this is the zoom in view. And then I select, this one of the nearby cluster, which is the PFAS attributed cancer burden cluster. So once I selected that, so there are 30 articles in this collection, because I think our developer just updated the server for some reason that gives some error. I apologize for that. But this is the true number 30 instead of over 250. And so based on this collection, I can issue a natural language query. I just tried to show you earlier, and the results of that is So there are three emerging PFAS chemicals that are explicitly mentioned in this 30 of cancer-related exposure studies. So this is what I would like to show you. And so to avoid give you the live demo, but I have the link and the QR code. So if you want, you can click the link or use the QR code to go to the website, and I will check with the developer to make sure the last minute change they make, make sure those will be fixed and working for people to look at it. So another visualization tool I would like to describe to you is this so-called PFAS GeoMap, Geographical Exploration of PFAS Exposure Studies. So basically, we use a web-based interactive world map to allow people to visualize PFAS-related articles geographically, to explore the geographical distribution over time again. And then, user can select a particular article on the map to a spot on the map to see the abstract of the article. And this map interface is implemented using Google Map API to map the extracted geo-entity terms to geocodes, longitude and latitude. In this case, we use OpenStreetMap to implement the world map. So this is sort of the demo. Sorry, I can show you the static one. Try to avoid last-minute surprise. So this is the world map. On the top, you can see a similar time slider by publication year from 2010 to 2025. On the left here, you can see the PFAS list. So we break this PFAS list into two sub-lists. One is the legacy PFAS chemicals, and the other one is the emerging PFAS chemicals. So in terms of display, the legacy PFAS are represented by circles, and the emerging PFAS are represented by rectangle in different colors. So in this case, I select only two PFAS chemicals to look at. One is one of the legacy PFAS chemical, which is PFOA. The other one is a replacement of this legacy PFAS, which is Adana. So this is a shorter chain PFAS chemical, which is Adana. Because people are concerned about all these legacy PFAS chemicals, so the manufacturer tried to substitute or replace the longer chain PFAS chemicals, which generate a lot of public health concern. But all these so-called emerging PFAS chemicals later found they also have some environmental concerns, including Adana. So to show you, so between 2010 and 2017, we can only see studies related to PFOA, this legacy PFAS, but no studies occur or be found, in this time period. But if we expand the time period, but before that, if we click on a particular spot, as I mentioned, it gives you a pop-up window. Show you the annotated abstract. Basically, that abstract has different types of entity terms highlighted in different color. For example, location is highlighted, in blue color, San Francisco Bay Area. In this case, maybe too small to see. And if we expand the time period to 2025, from 2010 to 2025, you can see the green square, which represent the Adana emerging PFAS chemical appear, after 2018. And as you can see, it's quite it's spread globally, although it's spread globally. But in this visualization, we can see actually more studies were conducted in Asia compared to Europe and North America. So this is, using this type of visualization, we can find this type of pattern. Of course, one caveat I want to point out is, although this type of visualization tools are useful. They are primarily designed to facilitate exploration of extracted metadata. So they can help researchers identify patterns and trends that can lead to the formulation of hypothesis-driven questions, but they do not act as a mechanism for drawing definitive research conclusions. So as conclusions, my presentation demonstrates the utility of an LLM-based approach for automated scalable metadata extraction from environmental health literature. It has broad applicability for accelerating evidence review synthesis. It involves a multidisciplinary collaboration because this is needed to ensure development of interpretable, robust, and human-centered AI systems. Our LLM approach can be applied to multiple environmental domains, including air pollution and pesticide exposure, although our use cases center on PFAS exposure, but it can be broadly applied to other environmental domains. Last but not least, we really closely engage with stakeholders from the Yale Superfund program and the EPA community. For future directions, we would like to extend our approach to include full-length papers to do deeper metadata extraction using LLM. Of course, to do that, we need a more detailed checklist or even specialized checklist. And in parallel to this effort, we have recently developed a more detailed checklist for environmental exposure assessment. And we started some pilot study to automatically populate this kind of more detailed checklist from full-length papers. We also would like to use LLM not only just to populate the existing template, but we also like to use LLM, its capability to aid the development and refinement of existing or even new template. We would like to enhance a visualization tool that I showed you previously. And also another future direction is to integrate environmental data with medical data or EHR data. And lastly, we would like to expand our user community engagement. Recently, we have reached out to Office community because they have also environmental data in addition to biobank or even EHR data. And also future plan is also to have outreach to the exposomics community. So here's our project team. This is really a cross-school collaboration between the medical school and School of Public Health, and also cross-institution between Yale and Stanford, and also EPA. I would like to acknowledge NIEHS for their generous funding support for this project. And thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the time to share with you our work, and I would like to entertain questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. And let's see whether there are any questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Don't see any. So I will start with some questions that I have as I was listening to you. So the green prompt engineering approach was something new to me. It sounds very, very interesting and honestly unexpected. So I wanted to ask, in general, how the energy consumption by LLMs actually, how does it compare to regular search and retrieval or cloud computing, or maybe social energy consumed by social networks? Because you hear a lot about energy consumption by LLM. You never heard about other computational aspects of our life. Is it so significantly larger?
Right. Yeah. So this is also quite new to me because the paper was published this year, I think back in February. Yes, so I think some of the approach or best practices are known to people, but they don't know too much about their environmental impact. So I think the general guideline is to create a prompt that avoid too much inferencing. So you want to be as explicit as possible. For our use case, I think we don't need a lot of inference feature, because inference can also increase the chance of hallucination. So you really want to balance it, or not use too much inference, because that would increase power consumption, especially when you're talking about large collection of papers. Maybe full-length papers. So we really want to reduce the carbon footprint. And yes, I think for both the retrieval and the extraction. So for retrieval, we start with keyword, most standard approach keywords search, but we use LLM only to filter the keyword search results. So that because it's only apply on abstracts and title, so the processing need the power is not that huge, and so even for the future full-length paper processing, I think one balanced approach is to use abstract to do more high throughput screening first. And then, to target hopefully a small subset of more targeted full-length paper for deeper metadata extraction. And that, again, could hopefully reduce the carbon footprint of LLM. So I don't know whether I address your questions.
So you shown an example of one prompt that was user role-oriented and then output format oriented. Doesn't matter if you merge both questions in one. It doesn't matter whether you do it iteratively or you ask that all together. Define the role and define the output.
Yeah. Sorry, you have broken up a little bit, so I catch part of it. Yeah. So, but I think if you want to combine, I think this is sort of the first best practice, the variational prompting. So you try to avoid this multi-step type of prompt or create separate prompt that in an iterative fashion. So you want to create one prompt that could produce output that include this type of varying scenarios. So it takes time, to formulate that kind of prompt, and also working with domain expert would be really be important and helpful. Yeah.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Kei, for the great talk. In your mapping of extracted terms to UMLS, there were varying rates that you presented mapping to terms. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on interpreting this. Are there gaps for environmental health, and perhaps is there an opportunity to enhance UMLS in these areas? Just wondering your thoughts on how we might approach this as a community.
Yeah, so we use a UMLS because a lot of people use that as a starter to identify the extent of, to understand the extent of mapping and identify potential gap. You can see these 8 categories of entity type. Some category or type entity type have a higher % of mapping, but others are low, especially I think the health outcome, for example, can be all over the place. Of course, some of them can be mapped to disease, but for non-disease outcome, it really, very challenging and problematic. Yes, but I think this could be quite useful to, as you said, to identify gaps in different types of entities. So if we can do it, systematically over time, because ontologies, as you know, are updated, and we have a sort of this living literature continuing producing new publications. So I think so that's another thing, this type of evidence analysis, if we can do it in real time or applying it on living literature, we can have this gap or landscape sort of real time presenting to the community. I think that would be to be helpful. But I think this type of this type of work can also help connect different communities like the ontology community and the environmental health science community to engage both communities to narrow this gap.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had the same question, Chris. When I saw the contamination source being the lowest on the list, I was really surprised and like, why is that? So you think it's about the representation of these terms in UMLS?
Right. Yes. So I that's another thing. I think UMLS I think is mostly traditionally used more for clinical vocabularies, things like SNOMED or even MASH term, even though PubMed used MASH term, but that's definitely limited. But more recently, I've seen the growth of environmentally relevant ontologies emerge. So I think this is something. If we go beyond UMLS, probably we can increase the mapping, improve the mapping results. But at the same time, I think we should work closely with the ontology community, particularly those group who have interest in developing environmental ontologies. So what are the new terms that we found unmapped? That unmapped terms can be given to those groups so that they can potentially incorporate them into their ontologies.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. So how do you handle data quality issues such as missing context, inconsistent terminology, or biased reporting in unstructured water contamination data?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I don't have a perfect answer right now, so this is still work in progress. So as I said, I think ontology can help part of it. So for this type of synonyms or ambiguity, so I think things like ontology can this retrieval augmentative or RAG generation so can use ontology to augment LLM to do a more accurate retrieval and extraction. So that's one approach, and even agents. So if instead of relying on just one single LLM model, we may want to break up the retrieval extraction task into different more refined subtasks, because like different sections in the paper, full paper we are talking about, this type of inconsistency or missing context may vary in different sections, depending on what type of information you want. Certain type of information may have higher level of bias or missingness compared to others. So I think we need to do more investigation and study to sort of systematically understand each of these issues and devise the proper approach to address them.
Thank you, Kei. And a related question there. So how do you validate the accuracy of LLM-derived insights against ground truth measurements or expert assessments? And related to that, ensuring repeatability, interpretability, and transparency in LLM outputs. You might have covered that a little bit, but maybe how are you? You mentioned human in the loop. Maybe that's you could expand on that a little bit.
Right. So we use 100 abstracts, so it's a little bit less than 10%. Yeah, because I think this is one of the challenges facing LLM or even traditional NLP approach, whether you have sort of this gold standard, right, a label data set, which is expensive and labor intensive to create. But generative AI LLM, you sort of delay that, evaluation to the later stage. You look at the output, and you have the human to sort of, evaluate. So we try to, come up with a strategy. For the extracted terms, we have the a domain expert to say, this is correct or this is not correct. Sort of try to reduce the amount of annotation or validation work for them. But I think this is still quite challenging. But I think also it's an education process. Initially, I think the domain expert find is a daunting task. Even though you give them 50 abstracts, they say, "Oh no!" I mean, that's a lot of work to go through. So you sort of iteratively try to understand their concern and try to show them how LLM work, even though there's some technical detail. But I think over time we sort of overcome that. They sort of feel more comfortable to work with us. And for us data science people, we also respectful for their time, appreciate their collaboration, and also at the same time learn more about the domain knowledge. So I think that process really helped us to come up with a win-win approach to to on one hand minimize the work of evaluate, try to minimize the effort of evaluation, but on the other hand give a good metric for measuring the quality of our results. And yes, if we still use standard metrics like specificity, recall, and F1 score. But I think unlike the traditional approach, relying on ground truth or label data set, we sort of come up with an iterative process to look at have the domain expert and the annotator to teach even data science people how to do this type of evaluation. So I think it's really a learning process.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think the time, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to our community. The talk is recorded and will be posted on the ELK website around maybe in 1 or 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.